Rich here, host of the Rich Terpene Show on CanadianCannabisRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in. Today's episode is part one of our two-part introduction to integrated pest management. We were really fortunate. We had Susan Cavey joining us from Natural Insect Control Niagara. NIC has been working with commercial growers for nearly 30 years to provide beneficial insects as an alternative to pesticides, which is very cool, very relevant right now to the discussion. So we spoke about some of the underlying philosophies of holistic agriculture, as well as the importance of establishing an ecosystem-based approach to IPM. If you're a grower and you're dealing with spider mites or other pest pressures in your garden, you'll no doubt be interested in what Susan has to say on the subject. Also, be sure to check back later this week for part two, which features a discussion with Stacy Hickman. Stacy's an entomologist with Natural Insect Control and self-proclaimed bug girl. She's crazy smart, really passionate about bugs, and we had a ton of fun chatting, so be sure to check back later in the week for part two. That said, without further delay, here is part one of our introduction to IPM with Susan Cavey. All right, folks, here we are. We're in Stevensville. Is this
Stevensville, Ontario? Yes.
Ontario. Mm-hmm. We're speaking with Susan at Natural Insect Control. Susan, how you doing today?
I'm great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
So, Natural Insect Control, this is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. I pride myself on using only natural inputs in my grow. And I think that everybody should be using only natural inputs in their grow. So can you tell me a little bit about why we need IPM? Why is this relevant? Why is this a relevant discussion?
Absolutely. IPM, Integrated Pest Management, is really looking at pest management overall from an ecosystem-based strategy. What you're doing is using a variety of techniques in order to manage any pest or pest damage. So biological controls or beneficial insects is one component of that. Cultural practices can be another component of that. Environmental management, wherever possible, is another component of that. So it's about using a variety of tools in your toolkit, for lack of a better way of putting it, in order to manage your grow operation overall.
So tell me a little bit about Natural Insect Control. What is it that you guys do? Why are we located in wine country right now?
Our core business is biologicals. We sell good bugs. We do that to commercial growers as well as home growers. That's certainly one of our portfolios and one of our core businesses. Wine country, as I say, we'd like to enjoy the wine around here, but we're absolutely a family-owned and operated business. And NIC started here in Stevensville on the kitchen table of our mother. I own the business with my brother John, and we're trying to carry on their legacy. They were real pioneers in the industry with the mantra of alternative to chemicals. That's how they ran their own personal natural farm. And as I said, the NIC started on their kitchen table, and 28 years later, here we are trying to educate people and provide good bugs to commercial growers.
That's fantastic. And I got to ask, in the early days, did you have a lot of, were there a lot of cannabis growers that were coming to you, or is that a relatively new thing?
Certainly the cannabis industry for us is growing, absolutely, as people become more aware and more open to it. But cannabis grow operations have been around probably since the beginning of growing. So we've had, quote, funky tomato growers come to us for pretty much for forever. We try to help people who are into the same philosophy that we are, which is alternative to chemicals, as I indicated, and to be able to grow clean crops the same way Mother Nature would.
And this is a really hot topic right now in the cannabis industry because, as we know, in 2017, we saw there were a number of recalls due to the use of banned pesticides by a couple of the LPs. We won't name names, but why is it that we're even seeing that at all? First of all, can we maybe start with pest infestations? Why do we get pest infestations either in commercial greenhouses or in agricultural fields? Why does this happen?
Well, the truth of the matter is nature finds a way. So there are a variety of insects out there that feed on plants. I mean, that's from the very beginning of it. And then in turn, there's a variety of insects that are deemed carnivores that simply feed on other insects. What you'll find in commercial grow operations is that you'll have a large amount of monocrop under glass. So it's like a buffet to the pests that want to feed on the plant. It's environmentally controlled. So you're running into scenarios where you have temperature or humidity levels commonly that are comfortable. And then think of your favorite food and you've opened the door and there's thousands of them. So you can see why pests would gravitate towards those scenarios. And of course, they've used a lot of adaptive skills as well, where they can live, I guess for lack of a better way of putting it, sometimes within greenhouse facilities. So it can be very challenging at times, even if you take the crop out, that you have to have very strong cultural practices in order to manage it for ongoing growth, particularly if you're putting in another monocrop. So again, the same crop again, time after time. And that's where IPM comes in. I know we had talked about IPM a little bit in a conversation. So IPM is really about integrated pest management. It's about ecosystem-based strategy. So you're trying to manage pest damage or pest issues, and you're doing it with a variety of techniques, biological controls being one of them, and then other things such as good cultural practices, as well as managing environmental aspects.
Is this typically a bigger problem with indoor growing than with outdoor growing? I know that it's often in greenhouses that we don't have those beneficials that are naturally occurring. Would we tend to see more need for integrated pest management or a stricter integrated pest management regime in an indoor growing environment as opposed to in a field somewhere?
Yes, absolutely. And just from exactly what you said, you don't necessarily have nature there helping you automatically. So commonly in things like organic grow scenarios, you might, for an astute grower, you would run into situations where they may or may not take out some of the other foliage around. That may also be a banker system for biologicals. Now, I am talking about growers who have been doing it for a long time. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for new growers because, of course, you don't want to run into a scenario where you're cultivating more pests. But you're 100% right. Nature helps manage nature to an extent outside. So you're going to have biologicals or beneficial insects that are automatically going to come towards the crop. And it's not as much as a monocrop because naturally other things are growing. Whereas under glass, controlled environment, vented, screened, etc. And a monocrop, as soon as you have a pest in there, you don't necessarily have the biologicals coming in because you're trying not to bring the pest in, but in turn, neither can the biologicals come in either. So it certainly can be more challenging within a completely controlled area.
Why don't growers typically just go straight to a natural IPM regime, do you think?
I think some of it's a bit old school. To be honest with you, people have been using chemicals and poisons for years. They apply them. It looks good. No more pest issue, ease of use, no problem. My concerns with it is that you never get 100% eradication with a chemical poison because there's generally always something that's left behind. It breeds, it now has a resistant, and next thing you know, you have a pest issue again at some point. Could be weeks, could be months, but it's back. You apply that chemical again, and all of a sudden you're thinking, hey, I didn't get quite as good control as I got before. And the ones that are built up and resistant breed some more. Next thing you know, your chemical's not working for you anymore, and you have to be heavier ones or more toxic ones or more chemical-based ones. The truth of the matter is insects do not build up a resistance to being eaten. So in the bigger picture, you don't run into those same sort of issues. Particularly with this crop, if you're using it in a cannabis in a medical capacity, it's an ingestible. Now, you might be dealing with people who already have a vulnerable capacity relative to immune systems or whatever's going on in their world. The last thing you want is to now be ingesting something that's a chemical. The original pesticides were nerve agents. They were known to be insoluble. They were known to be persistent. You would find them moving up the food chain. This is not something that you want to incorporate into an ingestible-based product, particularly something that's being considered medicinal. So when you use biological controls, none of that's an issue.
Is there any risk to overdoing it on beneficials aside from the economic loss if you don't necessarily need them at the time?
No, absolutely not. Beneficial insects are completely safe for you. No specialized equipment is required. There's no harm that can come to you. They're strictly carnivores looking for insects to eat. So you're 100% right. The consideration is based on an economic. You don't want to necessarily spend more than you need to, like in any proper growth scenario. So it would really be about aligning the quantity of beneficial preventatively that you're looking for relative to what plants you have, etc. And if you have that alignment right, and you monitor, which is incredibly important when using biologicals, then you can come out of it at a very economic outcome.
We talk about environment a lot, and one of the things that I'm always focused on is trying to coax the traits out of my plant, trying to coax those traits that I'm looking for. And that's my first thought with environment. I'm often not thinking about the environment that I'm creating for pests. What can I be doing as a grower so that I'm not reactive? What can I be doing as a preventative?
Well, when you talk about environment or managing the environment, you're right. I understand what you're saying. I want to create an environment that's conducive to my plant to make sure that it thrives as much as possible. You also need to consider that depending on what environmental aspects you have, i.e. what your temperature is, your humidity is, your light hours are, that could also be conducive to happy pests. It can also be conducive to happy biologicals. Both of those families of insects like specific spectrums of environment. The only consideration that I would be looking at or be concerned about as a grower would be going, okay, I have a specific environmental aspect that I want for my plant. Some of them can have direct impacts on pest life cycles. So, for example, if it's really, really warm, commonly a pest insect will cycle through its different life processes very quickly. And you may find it goes from egg to adult within 7 days. I'm just making hypotheticals, but you understand my concept. Whereas if it was much cooler, it might take 21 days or up to 4 weeks for them to cycle through their whole life process. So you can have bigger implications to the management of your environmental aspects that you need to consider because you're all of a sudden this pest infestation got really huge and you're not quite sure why because the environment you're creating is very much conducive to them having a big explosion. One thing that I think is really, really important when you're looking at a growth cycle is to look at it holistically. So commonly, we have lots of conversations at NIC that growers will come to us and they would have started with their clones or their cuttings, and they would have looked at their soil media and their nutrients and different aspect of the growth cycle. And as they move along, they think, oh, yeah, okay, now let's look at pest and what's happening with pest. Well, commonly, it's too late. You already have an infestation there, and to use biologicals reactively is very, very challenging. It's very important when using biologicals, beneficial insects, that you look at the crop holistically. And like I said earlier, it's not if you're going to get pest pressure, it's when. So you would put in preventative measures at the very beginning, get a biological in there working for you whilst you monitor and scout. So you want to ensure that you keep any pest pressure below cosmetic and economic thresholds so you can reap the full reward of your harvest at the end of your growth cycle. So rather than looking at it in silo, look at it holistically, and that's where you'll really reap the benefits of biological controls.
What sort of a role does geography play in the specific pest pressures that you're going to see depending on your location?
Your area or what's happening in your area, anticipation of pest pressure, etc., can be used as a guide at times. You can potentially anticipate pests within your crop as not if, but when. Right? So if you anticipate and go, okay, I have an expectation I'm going to have spider mites simply based on the crop that I'm choosing to grow. You can look at doing preventative measures for that. But geographically is very interesting. And we see this sometimes, though I couldn't chart you a map for it, but certainly within the Niagara region, we've noted this sort of pressure. What's happened before is that we've had growers come to us. They were fine. All of a sudden, they had a massive thrip issue. What happened and what did occur in the area is that the outdoor agriculture had been harvested. So commonly the crops outside had been harvested. They had some thrip pressure within that crop itself. Natural biologicals were help managing it, but now the thrip have nowhere to go. Now their food is gone. So they're looking for other food sources. And indoor growers in grow rooms, outdoor growers all of a sudden went from being okay to massive thrip pressure. And that was directly impacted on their geographic location and what was harvested in their outdoor agriculture. So it's hard to anticipate that unless you've been in the same area for a long period of time. You also have to be acutely aware of your surroundings, of what's occurring around you as well.
So with 30 years experience, or nearly 30 years experience in this particular area, you guys are pretty familiar with some of the pest some of the typical baddies that we're going to find in southwestern Ontario?
You know what's interesting? Outdoor agriculture changes all the time. Commonly, it used to grow corn all within this region. Over so many odd years, not that long ago, a lot of the outdoor agriculture has turned to soya. Obviously, a crop that's making more on the market. But what in turn occurred from there is people are coming to us complaining about ladybug issues. The reason why there's a huge amount of ladybug issues, and they say issues, I don't, because ladybugs are a biological and a good bug, so we're quite happy for them. But soya is very prone to the soya aphid. So now, obviously, they're growing a crop outdoor agriculture that has a big aphid problem. Aphid are ladybug's favorite food, big pest population, obviously a big biological population. Now, as I said, I'm quite happy to have ladybugs around, but what was happening is that Harmonia, the Asian lady beetle, was the one that was cultivating itself. Our winters are too cold for it, so it was hibernating in people's walls of houses, a lot of old houses around this region. And then on a nice, bright, beautiful, sunny day, all these ladybugs come out of hibernation and automatically go towards the light on your window. The part that I really found interesting is that previously Harmonia was sold as a biological control. They're very good as a generalist predator, etc. They used to sell them for 50 cents a bug. So now people are complaining because they have hundreds of them on their window. So
Right.
I just say scrape them off and shoot the little ladies outside. They're still
Yep.
good biological controls. So it's interesting. You mean that's just an example here in the Niagara region, but other areas would experience the same. Changes all the time.
Is it possible to look at data, environmental metrics, your geography? Is it possible to anticipate the sort of pest pressures that you may be facing in a particular geographic location, or is that just wishful thinking?
I wouldn't say that the logistics are that analytical. What you could anticipate more likely would be going within my environment that I'm creating at specific temperatures, humidity level, light areas, the crop that I'm growing. I can anticipate likely the pests that I'm going to see. Right? So not necessarily the level of pest pressure, but let's take the cannabis crop, for example. Very commonly, spider mites are an issue. Commonly, thrip are an issue. Commonly, fungus gnat are an issue. And I say this from simply the phone calls we continue to get. Some growers also experience other concerns such as aphids, etc. I always find that a little bit surprising. It's not pests that necessarily targets that crop, but nature finds a way. So you can anticipate what you're likely going to see. And then in tune to that, putting in preventative measures is really key. So, for example, commonly a biological used to help manage spider mites is a very small mite called phallacis. We recommend that people put phallacis on, say, a mother plant scenario, inoculate it. It will establish on the plant. The beauty of phallacis is that it will feed on other things. So it will feed on pollen, it will feed on russet mites, and it definitely feeds on two-spotted spider mites. So if you put it on your mother plant, inoculate it, it establishes. As you take clones, those clones already are inoculated with a biological. And it has that staying power because it will feed on other things. Now, it doesn't mean that you'll never get spider mite issues, but it gives you the opportunity to continue to monitor your crop. If you come into a scenario where you see a bit of spider mite issues, because remember, they can come in any way. They can come in on you. They can come in the room. They can come in on other cuttings. Like, nature finds a way. So if you see a spider mite issue, then you might bring in something like Persimilis. Persimilis only feeds on two-spotted spider mite. That's all it feeds on. Henceforth, that would not be used preventatively. Because if you don't have two-spotted spider mites, then there's nothing for it to feed on. Unlike phallacis, which is a very great mite commonly used in a cannabis grow, commonly used inoculating mother plants because it feeds on a variety of different food, different mites, and can also sustain itself on pollen. So it has that longer staying power and can be scout, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, to ensure that you don't end up with a large buildup of pests while you're monitoring your crop.
What do you want growers to know? Cannabis growers. What do you want them to know about integrated pest management, about biologicals, about beneficial insects? What's the number one thing that they should know?
Well, I have two key messages, actually, that I think are really, really important. We have lots of conversations about these with growers and have for 28 years of NIC's inception. If you look at your crop from a pest perspective, always look at it as if you are going to get pests. It's a given. It's not if you get them, it's when you're going to get them. That's a really key message. And the reason being is because if you run into a scenario of going, no, I have a clean room, it's no problem, I have great cultural, which is great. It's really good to have good cultural practices. Don't dismiss that nature will always find a way. So look at it overall, when I'm going to get pests, not if. And my second message is it's very keen to look at it holistically. That's how you're going to keep beneficial insects as a tool for IPM at an economic level, so you're not spending large amounts of money. And that's also how you have the ability with scouting that you can ensure that any pest pressure stays below cosmetic and economic thresholds, and you reap the full rewards of the harvest at the end of the crop. So don't look at it after you've ticked all your other boxes and then said, oh yeah, I better look to see if there's any pests going on. Think about it from the very beginning of your crop cycle. Think of it from a preventative aspect and put in a strict regime as a grower to monitor and scout your crop regularly, and then you'll be able to manage any pest pressure to ensure that you have great outcomes.
And we're going to speak with Stacy shortly about scouting and some of the tools that you may use to scout bugs. Can you give us just a brief overview? Because you've mentioned it a couple times now. So for the folks that are unfamiliar with what scouting is and why it's necessary, can you give us a little bit of background on that?
Scouting is really, really key. So scouting is just a monitoring of your crop. So consider things like walk your crop. As easy as that. Do a consistent pattern. It's important to have tools that are incorporated into that. So something as simple as a 10 times hand lens, different color Post-it notes, a log book, because you can walk your crop one day and note different things. And then if you walk from a different avenue or a different way next time, you may or may not remember what was where, when. So if you set up a little regime for yourself, walk in and monitor it regularly. Do a consistent pattern. If you notice any damage, commonly what professional growers do is they'll do some form of flagging or color coding system. If they notice a small amount of spider mite, they might use a blue Post-it. If they notice a little bit of thrip damage, they might use a red Post-it. If they've applied a beneficial in a certain area, they might use a yellow Post-it. Now, I know this sounds bigger than required if you're doing a 10 by 10 room, but you would be surprised how that level of knowledge, when you're looking at it overall and keeps it at the front of your mind, how again you're aware of what's happening within your crop area and how you can proactively manage it. And you mean, of course, I'm looking at it from a pest point of view and a beneficial point of view. Scouting is also inducive to things like what's happening relative to nutrition or diseases. You know what I mean? So there's all aspects that you'll gain the knowledge for.
It's all about paying attention.
It's all about paying attention.
Pay attention.
And consistently doing, rather than putting the plants in, watering, having a certain amount of light, feeding them, and go, yep, tick, we're good. I look forward to my harvest.
Right.
So that's, if you want to have that harvest to the maximum, then it's about doing. And paying attention. And if you make sure you take the time to do that, you'll find that any damage, disease, pest, nutrition, you will be able to manage that very early and be able to curtail any damage that it could have caused later on.
Susan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Where can people find out more about natural insect control?
You're certainly welcome to look online. It's literally our company name, naturalinsectcontrol.com. We have a search engine at the very front of it. So the beauty of it is you don't necessarily need to know the biological that you need, because not everybody is aware of what choices they have for beneficial insects. Within the search parameters at the front, you can put in your pest, put in spider mites, put in aphid, put in fungus gnat, and it will bring up different aspects, different biologicals or different tools you can use in order to help manage that. And the beauty of us is that we're family owned and operated. We're a small company. So if you call with questions, you're speaking with either myself, my business partner, John, our entomologist, Stacy. So we pride ourselves in not just being an order desk. It's really about providing that education and helping people do the best they can and reap the best of the rewards from the crop that they're growing.
There you go, folks. Check them out online at naturalinsectcontrol.com, or you can give them a call.